Welcome to the debate, the narcissist's shadow, healing self. Today we analyze the ideas from the book Unmasking the Echo, Healing from the Shadow of Narcissism.
And we are looking at, well, a manual that claims to be a roadmap out of hell. We're dissecting the work of Angel Gabriel, which it claims to offer these really actionable strategies for recovering from relationships with individuals who have narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD.
Right, but let's be clear right off the bat. We aren't just doing a book report here. We are stress testing a very specific and frankly a pretty aggressive proposal for how human beings should handle conflict, manipulation, and the erosion of self-worth. The whole premise is that many of us are living in an echo chamber, a state where our reality is just constantly denied and distorted, and that the only way out is this radical restructuring of our personality and our boundaries.
I'd say it goes much deeper than just conflict resolution or, handling difficult people. The argument here is that we are dealing with a distinct pathology. The proposal asserts that victims need a new vocabulary and a new set of tools, specifically concepts called the spectrum, trauma bonding, gray rocking, and internal reflection to regain their agency.
And that brings me right to my position. I've reviewed this framework, and while I absolutely acknowledge the very real pain of toxic relationships, I'm deeply skeptical of the methodology. I worry that by arming people with these diagnostic checklists and telling them to act like gray rocks, we're, pathologizing normal human friction. Are we actually healing people, or are we just training them to be paranoid amateur psychologists who see every difficult boss or spouse as a predator?
I understand that hesitation, I do. It sounds clinical and maybe a little cynical. But my position is that this methodology is a necessary, even life-saving intervention. We aren't talking about bad communicators. We are talking about the systematic erosion of the self. The argument is that when you are in that echo chamber, standard relationship advice like communicate more or be vulnerable, it actually backfires. These strategies, specifically the gray rock method and understanding the neurochemical addiction, are efficient tools to rig a game that was, stacked against the victim from the very start.
Okay, then let's look at the rules of this game. The first pillar of the proposal is the diagnosis. The material argues that narcissism isn't some binary switch on or off, but a spectrum. It claims there is a slide from healthy self-esteem all the way to pathological NPD.
Correct. And this is a vital distinction to make. The proposal argues that healthy self-esteem is like a robust immune system. It lets you take a hit, absorb criticism, and bounce back. You know who you are. NPD, on the other hand, is described as a demanding roar. It's this fragile structure that requires constant external validation just to stay upright. To help people spot this, the material references Ernest Jones's God complex.
The God complex, this is where I start to get a little uncomfortable. The checklist includes traits like aloofness, inaccessibility, and autoeroticism.
Which, just to clarify for everyone, in this context doesn't mean sexual gratification. It refers to a closed loop of self-satisfaction. The person is their own universe. Everyone else is just orbiting debris.
Right, a closed loop. But think about that list. Aloofness, overconfidence, a belief in one's own uniqueness. I mean, I could walk into the C-suite of any Fortune 500 company or a surgical residency and find 10 people who fit that description before lunch. We often reward these traits in our society. So is it helpful or even accurate to label a high-performing difficult leader as having a God complex? It feels like we're handing people a hammer and suddenly everything starts to look like a nail.
But you have to look at the context of the impact, not just the trait. That's the nuance the material insists on. A surgeon might be aloof because they are hyper-focused on saving a life. But do they have a profound lack of empathy? Do they view their staff or their family merely as extensions of themselves? See, the God complex isn't just about being arrogant. It's about the inability to acknowledge other people's reality. If you are in a relationship where you feel unseen, unheard, and emotionally starved, that label serves a very real function.
What function? Validation? Because to me, it just looks like confirmation bias.
It provides validation of a reality that is being actively denied.
If you are being gaslit, told that your perception is wrong, that you're crazy, that events didn't happen, having a checklist that matches your experience is an anchor. It stops you from thinking you are the problem.
But the material suggests keeping a discrete journal to document these behaviors. That feels like we're training people to be detectives in their own marriages. If I spend my week cross-referencing my partner's bad moods with a God complex table, am I protecting myself? Or am I just looking for evidence to support a diagnosis I've already decided on? It seems like a recipe for creating distance, not solving it.
I think if you're in a healthy relationship, that journal would indeed be paranoid. But you have to remember who this proposal is for. This is for the person trapped in the cycle of abuse. The material describes the phases: idealization, devaluation, and discard. If you're in the devaluation phase, where affection is withdrawn to punish you, that journal isn't paranoia. It's a reality check. It's data. And in a gaslighting dynamic, data is the only thing that combats the fog.
Let's talk about that fog, because it leads right into the second major topic, the why. Why do people stay? This is the part of the discourse I struggle with most. The proposal spends a lot of time on trauma bonds and invisible chains.
Because it's the most common question from outsiders, isn't it? If it's so bad, why don't you just leave?
And it's a valid question. If there is no empathy, if there is constant criticism, if you are documenting abuse in a secret journal, surely the logical adult decision is to walk out the door. My concern is that this whole invisible chain narrative removes personal agency. It paints the victim as a completely helpless passenger. At some point, don't we have to say, you are choosing to stay in this environment?
That is a very rational view of a deeply irrational situation. The material argues that you just cannot apply logic to a chemical addiction.
Addiction? We're talking about a relationship, not heroin. You can't just equate the two to excuse inaction.
Actually, the neural chemistry is frighteningly similar. The material brings up the pigeon experiment to explain intermittent reinforcement. It's a classic behavioral psychology study.
The Skinner box.
Exactly. If you give a pigeon a pellet every time it pecks a button, it pecks only when it's hungry. Predictability breeds boredom. But if you give it a pellet randomly, sometimes a feast, sometimes nothing, sometimes a shock, the pigeon becomes obsessed. It pecks incessantly until it collapses. The argument here is that the narcissist provides intermittent reinforcement.
So the love bombing phases are the pellets?
Yes. The brain gets hooked not on the abuse, but on the unpredictable return of the good times, the hoovering. When the abuser suddenly becomes the charming soulmate again, the victim's brain floods with dopamine, and it's twice as potent because it follows a period of starvation and abuse. The proposal argues this creates a literal biological addiction.
So you're saying the victim is chemically dependent on the volatility of their partner?
Yes. And that drives cognitive dissonance. The brain is trying to reconcile two opposing realities: the monster who screamed at you last night and the soulmate who brought you flowers this morning. That contradiction causes immense mental stress. So to survive it, the brain rationalizes. They're just stressed. They didn't mean it. If I just try harder, the soulmate will come back. It's not stupidity, it's a survival mechanism to alleviate the pain of that contradiction.
I will concede the biological argument has merit. Dopamine is a powerful driver, and intermittent reinforcement it's a well-documented phenomenon in things like gambling addiction. But does knowing this actually break the bond? Or is it just an intellectual comfort, oh, I'm like the pigeon, so I can't help myself? It feels like it could become a crutch to excuse staying in the situation. It's not me, it's my dopamine.
I disagree. I think it's the key that opens the lock. Once you realize, I am not in love, I am in withdrawal, you can treat it like an addiction. You stop looking for closure from them and you start looking for detox. And that brings us to the methodology. The proposal is very, very stark about how to break this cycle. It calls for unwavering boundaries.
Fortresses, I believe, is the term they used.
Yes, and the main strategy proposed is gray rocking.
And this is where I really have issues. Gray rocking. The advice is to become as uninteresting as a dull stone. Monosyllabic answers, no eye contact, no emotional reaction. You are essentially trying to bore the narcissist into leaving you alone by starving them of supply.
It's a compelling strategy for de-escalation.
Is it? Or is it passive-aggressive warfare? Imagine living with someone, a spouse, a co-parent, and deciding, I will now act like a robot. You just stop engaging. You say fine, yes, no. To me, that sounds like you are escalating the toxicity. I mean, if I did that to my partner, they would be furious, and rightly so. Doesn't this risk triggering what the material calls narcissistic rage?
Oh, it absolutely comes with risks. The material is honest about that. When you stop providing supply, the narcissist will often amp up their behavior to get a reaction. But you have to remember the goal. You aren't trying to fix the relationship. You aren't trying to have healthy communication. You are trying to survive until you can exit.
But what if you can't exit? The proposal suggests this for co-parenting or unavoidable family ties. Can you really gray rock a co-parent for 18 years? It seems like a recipe for a hollow, miserable life. You're protecting yourself, sure, but you're also killing your own spontaneity, your warmth, your humanity. You become a zombie to avoid a monster.
Well, that is why no contact is presented as the ideal. Gray rock is the fallback for when you are trapped. But I would argue that gray rocking is actually less draining than the alternative. The alternative is the echo chamber, constantly defending yourself against gaslighting, explaining your feelings to someone who doesn't care, apologizing for things you didn't do. That is exhausting. Being boring is safe.
Safe, perhaps, but it feels dehumanizing. The proposal demands you become an unwavering fortress. It says if you say, I will hang up if you yell, you must hang up the second the voice raises.
And that is the hardest part, the consistency.
It feels so rigid. Life is nuanced. Sometimes we yell, sometimes we forgive. This methodology leaves no room for grace.
Grace is for people who play by the rules of empathy. The argument is that you cannot offer grace to someone who views it as a weakness to be exploited. A boundary without a consequence is just a suggestion. The fortress mindset is about reclaiming respect.
It sounds like a Cold War, but let's pivot to the most controversial part of this proposal, the twist. After spending 6 chapters validating the victim and diagnosing the abuser, the material flips the script in Chapter 7.
Our own echoes.
Yes. It asks the reader to examine their own narcissistic wounds and self-centered personality style. To me, this felt like a betrayal of the reader. You've just convinced me I'm chemically addicted to a predator, and now you're telling me, hey, maybe you're a bit of a narcissist too. It sounds dangerously close to victim blaming. You asked for it because of your personality.
I actually think this is the most transformative part of the entire framework. Without this step, you are just waiting to be victimized again.
How so? By telling the victim it's their fault?
No, not their fault. Their vulnerability. The material uses this concept of primary versus secondary narcissism. Primary narcissism is that healthy infant state. I am the center of the world. We all start there. But secondary narcissism is described as a defense mechanism, a shell we build. The argument is, do we, as victims, have echoes? Do we seek validation from others because of our own early unmet needs?
So it's asking, why did you attract this person?
It's asking, why did this dynamic feel familiar? Why did the love bombing work so well? Usually, it's because it filled a void that was already there. A narcissistic wound. If I have a deep insecurity, a need to be needed, a need to be saved, I am going to be susceptible to the grandiose promises of a narcissist.
I see the logic, but I really dislike the terminology. Calling it secondary narcissism just muddies the water. It implies a moral equivalence between the abuser and the abused. Why not just call it codependency or insecurity? Why use the N-word on the victim?
Because echo implies a reaction. The idea is that we mold ourselves to fit the narcissist's needs. We echo them to get safety or love. The twist is that you can't just build a fortress around you to keep people out. You have to rebuild the sanctuary inside you so you don't need their false validation.
So the cure isn't just no contact, it's self-parenting?
For you.
It shifts the focus from blaming the narcissist, which ultimately keeps you tied to them mentally, to empowering the self.
That leads us to the final stage, a life unchained. The proposal claims that by doing this internal work, you reach a state of serene vigilance.
I love that phrase, serene vigilance.
It sounds lovely, but again, I look at the efficiency and the cognitive load of this whole package. We have the spectrum diagnosis, the trauma bond realization, the gray rock defense, and the internal reflection cure. That is a massive amount of work.
Healing from trauma is massive work. There's no pill for this.
But my concern remains, does this methodology actually work in the long run? Or does it simply trade one form of obsession, obsessing over the partner, for another form of obsession, obsessing over the methodology? I can see someone becoming so rigid with their fortresses and so analytical about intermittent reinforcement that they lose the ability to trust anyone. They just become a gray rock to the whole world.
That is a real danger. If you stay in the gray rock phase forever, you become a stone. You lose your color. But the material lays out a path through that. The goal isn't to stay a rock. The goal is to get to the point where you can solidify boundaries naturally. The gray rock is a shield you pick up during the battle. You don't wear it to the victory party.
But you have to admit, the God complex framework encourages a cynical view of human nature. It encourages us to look for the devil in the details.
Or a realistic one. If you've been burned by fire, learning the physics of heat isn't cynicism, it's safety. Serene vigilance means you can spot the red flags, the love bombing, the subtle devaluations, early enough that you don't need to gray rock. You just walk away before the bond even forms.
All right, let's wrap this up. We've looked at the spectrum, the chemistry, the fortress, and the mirror. Where do we land on this proposal?
For me, this is a must-try methodology for anyone who feels crazy in a relationship. If you are questioning your reality, if you are in that echo chamber, you need these tools. The gray rock method, while it is harsh, is efficient. It stops the bleeding. And the understanding of intermittent reinforcement, that is the key to unlocking the cell door. You aren't weak, you're addicted. That realization changes everything.
I remain cautious. I see the value in the intermittent reinforcement theory. It explains a lot about why people stay, and it's backed by solid behavioral science. That is the strongest part of the book. But I worry about the God complex labeling and the potential for gray rocking to become a permanent lifestyle of emotional avoidance. It's a powerful antibiotic, but you shouldn't stay on it forever.
I agree with that. It's an emergency intervention, not a lifestyle for healthy relationships.
But we can both agree on one thing from the material: the concept of unwavering boundaries.
Absolutely. Whether you buy the whole spectrum or not, the idea that a boundary without a consequence is meaningless, that is the critical takeaway.
If I say, I will hang up, I must hang up.
Exactly. Even if your voice shakes.
That brings us to the end of our debate. We've unmasked the echo, looked at the pigeons, and built some fortresses.
And hopefully left the listener with a decision to make.
Indeed. Do you need to gray rock someone in your life, or do you just need to put down the journal and talk? That is for you to decide. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.